All right, good evening. Welcome to another Lafayette Rashad Mitchell's YouTube channel. Let's get into it, man. The Word of God, like the Spirit Study Bible, chapter 16. This is the last chapter of First Corinthians. We're going to be done. We're going to get right into the Perfect Bibles book. As This is a book that I've been reading for a long period of time about the Miami Notre Dame rivalry, why it became a rivalry, why it became what it would become at the time during the 80s, all the way to 1990. Unfortunately, ended the series at that time. But this is just chronicling why this rivalry became what it was. And I wanted to read about it. Now we're in chapter 12, so we're going to talk about end of an era that's dealing with Jimmy Johnson's departure from the Miami Hurricanes to coach the Dallas Cowboys. So obviously that was the right decision for him because he ended up winning two Super Bowls and building that team to what they would be, a dynasty. So from that standpoint, from that perspective, he had the right decision. He made the right decision to move on to coaching in the NFL and coach the Cowboys, bring it back to prominence, which he did. So we're gonna get into that and more so forth. Let's start with the Word of God first. Chapter 16, verse 1. Beg your pardon. Chapter 16, verse 1, and it reads: Now about the collection for God's people, do what I told the Galatian church to do. Chapter 16, Paul gives direction for the collection for the poor, leaves at Jerusalem, describes his future plans, and speaks about his fellow workers in the Lord. Chapter 16, verse 22, and it reads, If anyone does not love the Lord, a curse be on him. Come, O Lord. A curse. That means Paul is ending this letter by reminding all professional believers that to claim to be believers yet not to love the Lord is to be a curse or doom. To not love the Lord means to fail to have a heartfelt love for him, to disobey him, to distort the gospel of New Testament revelation. To be a curse means being excluded from the true spiritual church on earth and finally from the heavenly kingdom of the age to come. Now, Paul wants his readers to understand that the ultimate test of Christian discipleship is a personal and heartfelt loyalty to the Lord Jesus Christ. Come, O Lord. That means the Aramaic expression, Marana La, was probably used as a prayer or a greeting among Christians. But the early church was constantly praying that Christ might return soon. And Christians are those who long for his appearing. Express this longing in word and deed. All right, so that's it. So I'll be in 2 Corinthians tomorrow, chapter 1, 2, and 3. Let's get into this book about the Miami Hurricanes and Notre Dame rivalry. Now, these two teams be facing each other 13 days from now, on the last day of August, August 31st, in Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. So this rivalry will be renewed. So I'll continue on with chapter number 12. And this is about end of an era. Like I said, when you look at Jimmy Johnson, it was his last hurrah with Miami. He left after the 88 season to go coach the Dallas Cowboys, and they turned into a dynasty, built that team into a powerhouse again. And let's get into it, man. Let's break down this chapter. It also talks about Dennis Erickson replacing him as head coach. So as stirring as the victory was as essential to the trajectory of Lou Holtz's program, indeed, the trajectory of all college football as Irish 31, Hurricanes 30 had been, the result alone had not made Notre Dame a team in complete charge of its own destiny. Because on the university's campus, atop all-male 11-story Grace Hall dormitory was perched an 8-foot high sign that read, Number 1. Whenever an Irish athletic team ascended to the top of the national ranks in the sport, the sign was illuminated. So on the night of October 15, 1988, the roof of Grace Hall remained shrouded in blackness, as there remained one team ahead of Notre Dame in both major polls. That was UCLA. So the Bruins seemed like they wanted to stay there. On the day Notre Dame beat Miami, UCLA defeated Cal in Pac-10 play. The following week, the Bruins trounced Arizona 24-3 to keep the Irish at number 2. Next up for Coach Tony Donahue's team was Washington State. Usually irrelevant in the Pac-10 race for the Rose Bowl and coasting along in late October with 4 victories against 3 defeats, the Cougars seemed like no real threat to UCLA's reign at the top of their polls. Behind quarterback Tim Rosenbach, Washington State's offense was dangerous, but its defense was one of the nation's worst. In the second half, UCLA built a 21-point advantage and seemed poised to cruise at home against the Cougars, who had lost 20 consecutive games in Los Angeles against UCLA and USC. Then exclusively, the momentum began to swing. We got down That fall, we just kind of saw red and decided to go after it. Trailing just 30-27 in the fourth quarter, the Cougars ran 13 consecutive running plays on their go-ahead drive. Despite having a talented quarterback behind center, they went ahead 34-30 on a 1 yard run by sophomore running back named Rich Switten, who was playing only because the leading rusher in the conference was Steve Rashad was injured. Behind All-American quarterback Troy, the Bruins drove to the Washington 6 yard line with 44 seconds to go. It appeared that they would survive the scare, but unbelievably, Aikman fired four consecutive incompletions. His game was over. Called the luck of the Irish, Notre Dame's Irish, wrote LA Times columnist Mike Downey, because guess who's #1 now? As predicted, but the polls came out a couple of days later, Grace Hall roof was bathed in light, will remain so for the next few glorious months. Thanks to the also rans from Pullman, Notre Dame's season had changed permanently. It would turn out. So too had the career of Washington State's young and rising head coach Dennis Erickson, who obviously coached at the University of Miami. He replaced Jimmy Johnson. So when the smoke cleared later, the narrative became too oft-told to allow for variances. Jimmy Johnson would feel that the shared history between him and Texas oil tycoon Jerry Jones, his college roommate, had been vastly overstated. Obviously, go back to being teammates for Arkansas in the late 60s. The two offensive linemen have been paired by coach Frank Boyce for Roman Simons, thanks solely to the alphabetical similarities of their last names. Stuff like that. So let's skip around a little bit. He's talking about their partnership, their friendship, and all of that. But at the same time, this chapter talks about maybe Johnson and Jones weren't as tight knit as the world would soon come to believe, but neither were they exact strangers. Stuff like that. I was included in this chapter. College roommate. That's what I see right here. So Tom Landry, he was dismissed, and Jones purchased the team in '89. Here comes, Jimmy Johnson. Jones was buying the team from H.R. Bumwright for $130 million. They were able to win the Super Bowl, obviously. They needed a coach to replace Tom Landry, and that was Jimmy Johnson, quote unquote college roommate. They came back to back Super Bowl champions. So this is a great quote from Dave Wanstead, who's Johnson's defensive coordinator at the University of Miami. That leaves the defensive coordinator at the University of Miami, as well as doing his thing with the Cowboys. He said if Jimmy had stayed at Miami, he could have won 5 national championships. He'd be in the Hall of Fame. He knew that, and he chose to keep moving on. That's what drove him to challenges. So that's the reason why he left. Now, before that happened, he talked to the Miami players. He wrote the press for a few days. He chose instead to make his public emergence at the upcoming introductory press conference in Dallas. So his final speech to the Hurricanes was leaving behind was short and emotional. You know the job you have to do. Players win championships, not coaches. And Johnson began to walk out of the room, then turned back briefly and said, "One more thing. You get after Notre Dame's tail." So now, with Johnson's exiting college football, it left a void. Howard Snellberger had built Miami into an unlikely modern power, but it was Johnson who had transformed the Hurricanes from a likable underdog to the most polarizing brand in college football, perhaps all of sports during the '80s. And it was Johnson who had encouraged his players to express their personalities, managing the difficult task of balancing individuality with team concept. This was new to college football because the previous generation of great coaches, meaning like Bear Bryant and Woody Hayes, preached obsessive sublimation of personal expression for the sake of the team. Meanwhile, Johnson was one of the first children of the '60s to rise in the coaching ranks. While General Patton disciple Hayes, for example, applauded the '60s counterculture movement with every fiber of his being, Johnson grew up alongside it. James Joplin had been his high school history class. Although Johnson was no hippie, some of the lessons of the era had definitely taken. Johnson's predecessor in coaching had watched great athletes like Ted Williams march off to war. Johnson had watched Muhammad Ali refuse to go. Jimmy Johnson had changed college football. And college football, it seemed, would be a less interesting sport without him involved. And what was true for the sport as a whole certainly seemed to be true of the best rivalry going, the one between the Hurricanes and Notre Dame. By piling on the points against the Irish in Faust's final game, Jimmy Johnson had awakened something in the Notre Dame players right at the time when somebody could do something about it was waiting in the wings. It had not happened overnight, but by the time Notre Dame's win over Miami in 1988 came to play, a series that had been one-sided for much of its history now promised a new era of competitive contest and genuine animosity. Lou Holtz had been the drill sergeant who brought the Notre Dame program back up to speed, but Johnson had been the director of the rivalry's great drama. His personality and philosophy had made the series into such compelling theater. And now, just like that, he had left for greener pastures. The 1989 rematch would have been the most anticipated game of the coming year's schedule. Was still many months away. Could the rivalry survive a coaching change? So here comes Dennis Erickson. He gets hired as a coach. Now, Dennis Erickson was a passing game innovator. It was very immediate when he was with Idaho. Had the spread offense, very innovative. So that made him like a guy that can fit well with this high power offense of Miami that he's going to bring to the table. But Seattle Times columnist Steve Kelly, who at the time, who's this guy? Is he going to become the Larry Brown of college football? He's after 1 year at Wyoming without saying goodbye to his players. He flies to Miami after declaring, I am not interested in that job. The fact is, Dennis Erickson owes Washington State more than just two fleeting seasons. And then Erickson had a quote in this chapter, and he said, you're talking about one of the greatest programs in college football at that time. How many opportunities do you have like that in your career? When it was all said and done, I felt like I had a chance to compete for a national championship, which I wasn't going to be able to do at Washington State at that time. For me, it was an upgrade in what I was doing for a living. Yeah, so that's what's going on in this chapter about Dennis Erickson coming to coach Miami and how he had to deal with the holdovers from the team that Jim Johnson built, the players that he recruited. So he had to keep it going. And obviously he would do that, obviously, when that's championship in 89. So the offense was going to be, the same. It's going to be, innovative spread offense. But when it talks about this chapter, the offense had been run at Miami under Snellberger and Johnson have been extremely successful. In many ways, also the way college football was played. Quarterbacks like Jim Kelly, Vinny Testenberg, Steve Walsh had helped the game close the door on a stodgy 1970s when it was like Ohio State's Woody Hayes would have been hard-pressed to decide between walking over hot coals and putting the football in the air. But the main difference between the way Miami ran its offense and the way offense had been played in the college game before that had been the frequency of pass plays, not necessarily the plays themselves, because the setup that the Hurricanes was quite conventional, including two backs, quarterback who dropped back deep to scan the field from a stationary position in the pocket. So when you get Dennis Erickson, now he's doing something different than what Johnson was doing when he was there. This is a brand new offense, a spread offense. So What Erickson brought with Bob Burkowski was completely different. They utilized just one running back in the vast majority of their formations. That was heresy to college football traditionalists. And then we look at quarterbacks were not treated as statues, but instead frequently rolled out, asked to quickly hit short targets. So the new Miami offense was much similar to the modern day spread offense, the foundation of the University of Florida's two national championships in the 2000s, than it was to anything that had been run before in college football. Many other players were skeptical. You could talk about it. You could say that this was what you've done in the past. None of that stuff really mattered to anybody until we started to get on the field and to play the games and show how successful it could be. And for years, Miami had cultivated an image as an outlaw program shaking up college football. Then perhaps no bigger sign that the Hurricanes were now firmly entrenched in the establishment. The fact that their quarterback was considering exiting because the new offense was just too unconventional for his taste. So Steve Walsh seemed to be as good as gone. In early March, however, he surprised many onlookers by announcing that he would begin spring practice with the Hurricanes. Then he had until April 10th into the NFL supplemental draft held between the first and second rounds and appeared ready to use every second of the time he had to make an informed decision. Walsh practiced with the Hurricanes 8 times in the spring. He didn't look at all like the quarterback who had led the nation with 29 touchdown passes the previous season. In two spring scrimmages, he completed just 21 out of 40 passes for 195 yards and one touchdown. Meanwhile, backup Craig Everson had thrown for 240 yards and had connected on three touchdown passes. And he had done it all his 11 fewer attempts. It was indeed the case, or simply a function of his heart not being in it any longer. Just a few months removed from a top five finish in the Heisman Trophy voting, Walsh looked like the lesser fit in the new Miami offense. So in early April, Steve Walsh, the legendary trophy frontrunner at the most famous quarterback factory in America at the time, opted out of his fifth year of eligibility, instead entered the NFL supplemental draft. He said, all my college goals have been accomplished. So Steve Walsh goes to the draft. He leaves. He's not coming back. So now, in the new system, here comes then Craig Erickson. He's the quarterback. He's a new quarterback. But Walsh wrote in writing that the outside offense that Davis Erickson had no bearing on whatsoever on my decision to enter the professional ranks. I want our fans to understand this. So you look at this offense, this Stevens offense. Walsh had been given 3 or 4 progression read options on every snap. So under Erickson, with the system's trademark quick decision making and release, he would be limited to one or two. He thought it would stifle his growth as a quarterback. The thought was not unfounded, as the spread would become more popular in college football in years to come. NFL scouts would scratch their heads when attempting to project a player's performance at the next level. Randall Hill said that our offense under Johnson and Stevens was a professional offense. It could fit into any professional team. But Coach Erickson brought in was a good all college offense. Yet it put up a lot of numbers. Yet it did well. He's been very successful in college ranks, but what we had before then was a very successful professional offense. So here comes Craig Erickson. He's the new quarterback. He had been so far ahead in games the previous 2 years. Has seen plenty of action, throwing nearly 700 yards and 8 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions in his freshman and sophomore years. So in the first game of the 1989 season was against Wisconsin, and Craig Erickson threw 4 touchdown passes. As Miami won 51-3 against Wisconsin, and they dominated, blowing out the Badgers. Cal, Missouri took out the #2 ranking, pushed them behind only Notre Dame, and they beat Michigan State in the 4th game of the season. But Erickson broke a knuckle on his throwing hand, so Gino Torretta comes in as a redshirt freshman. Obviously, they won that game. And then he made his first start against Cincinnati, and he had thrown already 239 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Hurricanes won 56-0. They threw 468 yards against San Jose State, 48-16. So Dennis Erickson may have changed Miami's offense, but it hadn't changed everything about the way the Canes played the game. After the game was over, San Jose State's Paul Gilbert fumed about Miami's taunting. It takes away from their greatness, that style, Gilbert said. Some of our personal fouls were in retaliation. I don't like that. But under circumstances, to blame with it, I'm glad our guys fought them all the way. That was the nature of how we played. It wasn't degrading anybody. That's what everybody said. That wasn't what it was. They enjoyed playing. At times we went overboard, no question about it, but they just enjoyed playing. So they play on October 29th against Florida State, lose 24-10. That was the date. So they lost that game. Then the game of the year, obviously, it was Notre Dame. According to the defensive end, Willie Pegues, says we want Notre Dame to stay on top. We don't want anyone to knock them off with us. We want them to come down here, ranked #1 with us, #2, so it will be the biggest game of the season. In our hearts, we believe we are the best. So I'm done with that, so I'll get ready for tomorrow. 3rd down and 43, 3rd and 43. That's going to be on the docket. Chapter 13. All right, so that's it for tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed tonight being chapter 1, 2, and 3 of 2 Corinthians, and chapter 13. 3rd and 43, chapter 13. Till then, have a good night.